Today in Final Fantasy, we get another super push prowess equipment, our White Adventureland, a way to turn all of our scries and surveils into draws and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Final Fantasy spoilers. So we've reached day 3 of spoiler season, and we have some really spicy cards to talk about today. Some stuff I think is going to be really good in Standard, a ton of Commander stuff of course, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new Final Fantasy cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Final Fantasy. So first up today, we get a very interesting new wrath that I think is going to be pretty good in Standard in Ultima. So Ultima, 5 mana sorcery, destroy all artifacts and creatures, and you end the turn, which is a pretty interesting twist on a wrath. So Ultima, I imagine that this is supposed to be our Sunfall replacement at rotation. So at rotation this summer, Edge of Eternity, Sunfall's gone, and Ultima is basically your go-to 5 mana wrath that is not just going to deal with the board of creatures, it's going to deal with some other stuff. It's going to annoy your opponent by ending the turn. The end the turn mode on there is actually very interesting. I'm not sure if it's an upside or a downside, but we can talk about that in a minute. And I gotta say, I love the design on this card. One of my big criticisms of Sunfall is because it just exiled everything, you couldn't really build your deck to play around it. Like traditionally against a Wrath deck, you could play recursive creatures, Bloodghast or Gravecrawlers or so forth, and be like, okay, you Wrath my board, sure, I'll get my creatures back in the future, but none of that stuff worked against Sunfall. The thing I like about Ultima is it's very powerful. Getting all creatures and all artifacts, that's already a very powerful Wrath at 5 mana, and then the end the turn mode, it gives you a reprieve from some of that recursive stuff. If you blow up the board with Ultima and the turn ends, stuff's not going to come back into play right away. You're going to have to wait till the next turn, but it's also not going to invalidate it forever. So I feel like this is a nice middle ground between exiling everything like Sunfall and just a normal Wrath that doesn't really have any upside. So why is this card probably going to be important in Standard? And I think the big answer is it blows up artifacts as well as creatures. One thing we've been struggling with in Standard lately is Cori-Steel Cutter. And Cori-Steel Cutter, the problem with this card is even if you answer it, it still leaves behind the tokens. If you have creature removal, you can kill the tokens. That doesn't really do anything because they're going to make more tokens. If you have artifact removal, you can get rid of the Cori-Steel Cutter, but you're still under threat from however many prowess tokens they have around from when they had Cori-Steel Cutter. Ultima cleans up everything. It gets rid of Cori-Steel Cutter. It gets rid of all the tokens. So I think that by itself is a huge deal for our current Standard format. So hopefully this helps keep Cori-Steel Cutter in line. The other thing this card does, on top of just being like a normal Wrath for creatures, is it works like a safety valve for some archetypes that have potential to be really powerful, but haven't quite got there yet. So we've seen like some artifact decks, Simulacrum Synthesizer, Repurposing Bay decks. They've been pretty good on the fringes of Standard. They haven't really been tier 1 yet, but this is a nice safety valve in case those decks get too good. You have Ultima that can just come down, wrath away all the artifacts. Same with vehicles. We got a lot of good vehicles in Aether Drift. They haven't really taken off as a tier 1 archetype, but this is a nice safety valve in case vehicles ever break the format or whatever. So I think that is the power of Ultima. Just blowing up all the creatures, all the artifacts, that by itself is enough to make this a very good Standard card. And then we get the end the turn text, which I'm not sure if this is an upside or a downside. So on one hand, what does ending the turn do? Basically, when you resolve this, you're going to blow everything up, and it's going to fizzle any triggers that are on this deck. So maybe you have Sephiroth, which when creatures die, you get to drain for 1, a Blood Artist effect. Sephiroth isn't going to damage you with an Ultima wrathing the board, because all of those triggers from Sephiroth are going to get exiled when Ultima resolves. Or Unstoppable Slasher, also a very good answer there. Slasher, normally when it dies, it comes back into play, but Ultima is going to fizzle that trigger, so it's not going to come back into play. So there is some upside here in certain matchups. On the other hand, ending the turn can be a downside. If you're playing a control deck, a lot of times you want to wrath the board and then redeploy a threat. You want an Ultima and then Shiko or something. Not going to be able to do that with Ultima because once you resolve it, the turn's going to end, so you're not going to be able to play something else the next turn. The other thing you can do with this card, and this might be more of a commander thing probably, but it's pretty spicy if you can cast it at instant speed. If you have Teferi Time Raveler, Videl Kinori, Leyline of Anticipation, anticipation, some way to flash this in. Then you can use it to end the turn during your opponent's turn, which kind of turns it into an extra turn spell that also blows up all the artifacts and creatures. So we'll have to wait and see. At 5 mana, I imagine it's probably not quite good enough for Modern, even though Teferi is pretty good in Modern. Maybe some sort of like Pioneer shenanigans, but I think worst case, if you're playing Vidalcanori's, Anticipates, and so forth in your commander deck, it makes Ultima go up even more in value, because if you can end the turn during your opponent's turn, it is an absolute blowout. So I think as far as Standard is concerned, I think this Wrath is actually pretty good. Just assuming no shenanigans, you can't flash it into instant speed, I think this is probably a tier below, like, Farewell Austere Command, but still, if you're playing 4, 5, 6 Wraths in your white commander deck, I think this probably makes the cut, although again, it's going to depend partly on your deck, and if you're a believer in mana rocks, if you're playing a bunch of mana rocks, this gets a little bit worse, because you're going to be blowing up a lot of your mana when you blow up all the artifacts. On the other hand, if you're playing mostly like the white catch-up ramp effects and not playing mana rocks, then this goes up even further in value, because in commander, you're not allowed to blow up people's lands. That's like the biggest taboo, but for some reason you are allowed to blow up their mana rocks. So this is a Wrath that's not only going to take away all your opponent's creatures, but against some decks it's going to take away like half their mana as well, which is kind of ridiculous. So I think if you want this in your deck, it's good enough to play in commander. Just keep in mind, if your ramp plan is like 10-15 mana rocks, it's going to be a little bit worse than some of the other Wraths, because you're going to be hurting yourself. But if you're not playing mana rocks, then this becomes one of the stronger Wraths in the format, because not only are you getting rid of the creatures, you're blowing up your opponent's mana as well. So Ultima, the card seems really good. Sunfall replacement for Standard, some sweet shenanigans if you can cast it at instant speed thanks to the end of the turn effect, and a very good commander card. Speaking of Ultimas, we got another one in Ultima Origin of Oblivion, a new 5 mana 4/4 colorless legendary god. It has flying. It says when it attacks, put a blight counter on target land. For as long as that land has a blight counter on it, it loses all abilities and types and just taps to make a colorless mana. And then when you tap a land for colorless mana, add an additional colorless mana. So Ultima, worth mentioning about this card, with those blight counters, once you put a blight counter on a land, unless your opponent has some effect that can remove the blight counter, it's going to stick around for the rest of the game. Even if Ultima dies, that land is still going to be blighted. Blighted probably sounds better, but it's still going to have the blight on it. It's still going to work like a waste. It's still going to lose all of its types and abilities. So I think Ultima, the biggest calling card here is probably the mana doubling. If you think about what this card does, it turns lands into wastes essentially, but then it's also a Forsaken Monument, and we've seen Forsaken Monument be incredibly busted. Like if you build around Forsaken Monument with a bunch of things that make colorless mana, it is a really, really strong payoff by doubling your mana. The twist with Ultima is, unfortunately, it only doubles your land mana. Forsaken Monument, any permanent that you tap for colorless, you would get an extra mana out of. This only works specifically with lands, but you get the upside that you also get a pretty reasonable Sarah Angel style creature that can mess with your opponent's land, and if you're playing commander, you can play it in the command zone. So this is like a Forsaken Monument that you can always have access to in commander. So as far as Standard's concerned, what do we do with this card? And really, I think this is mostly supposed to be a card that's for commander, but I think there's some possibilities in Standard. So one is some sort of colorless ramp deck where you play Ultima, use it to double your mana, play a bunch of wastes or whatever, other colorless lands, and use this to just turbo out Ugin of the Storm, Portal to Phyrexia, Summon Bahamut, the big colorless things, and use those to take over the game. I don't know how good that plan would be, but it does seem like it would be pretty fun. It seems like a cool deck to build. Like, colorless ramp is just such a weird idea for Standard, so I'm definitely going to try to build it once the set comes out. Another possibility is maybe this is a land destruction card, so I know it doesn't actually blow up a land, but still, turning a land into a colorless source that loses all of its abilities and types, that can be pretty powerful, and doubly so because it can target basic lands. If you look at our standard land destruction, we have stuff like Kranko's Buzz Crusher, Magmatic Hellkite, but these only hit non-basic lands, so what ends up happening is you mess with your opponent's non-basics, but then their basics just let them make mana and they can still do their thing. I'm imagining the Ultima, maybe this kind of fills the gaps in the land destruction plan, where you can use Magmatic, Hellkite, Buzz Crusher to blow up the non-basics, and then the basics that slip through, Ultima can turn them into waste so your opponent still can't make the colors of mana they need, and maybe we can actually build a straight-up land destruction deck in Standard. Once you get back to older formats, I imagine you use this like a Forsaken Monument. As I said before, we've played some wild Forsaken Monument decks in like Historic or Timeless, where you just ramp into Forsaken Monument and you have so much mana you just pop off with Eldrazi or Echoes of Eternity. Like I said before, the only downside is Ultima doesn't work with mana rocks, which are usually really good in Forsaken Monument decks, but still, as a backup to Forsaken Monument, I think I would be down with playing like an extra copy or two, just to make sure I'm always going to have access to the effect, even if Ultima is a little worse than Forsaken Monument. In Commander, I really like this card. In Commander, there are so many powerful utility lands that this is a really friendly way, or as friendly as pseudo land destruction can be, but it's a friendly way to deal with your opponent's lands. Just blowing up opponent's lands is pretty taboo in Commander, but I think that turning them into waste, just your opponent still has them, it's still on the battlefield, they can still make mana, but they're not going to be able to get, a million mana from Cabal Coffers or Nykthos. They're not going to lock down your attacks with Maze of Ith. I feel like this is a pretty positive way to add some answers to really strong utility lands to Commander that isn't going to make people too salty, which making people salty is fine, but if you make people too salty, then you got to stop playing the card. So I like that this kind of hits the middle ground where it's powerful enough to shut down really good utility lands, but probably not annoying enough that your playgroup's going to keep you from playing it. The other thing I like about this card is it's actually kind of cool for a colorless commander. I feel like colorless commanders tend to be pretty boring. They're all just like ramp into Eldrazi decks, and I guess Ultima is still kind of a ramp into Eldrazi deck, but the messing with your opponent's land part is pretty unique, so I imagine this will be a relatively popular colorless commander, and I think it's also good in the 99 of pretty much any colorless commander deck, just for its mana doubling mode. Forsaken Monument, one of the best cards in the colorless deck. Ultima, maybe not quite as good, but still close enough that I think this will show up in a lot of colorless commander decks. So Ultima, very interesting card. I'm excited to give it a try in Standard, and it seems like a super sweet commander card. Next up, we get another mono green Esper card. Just weird Final Fantasy things. An Esper Origins / Summon Esper Modded, and I don't really know what to make of this card. So the front side of this card, 2 mana sorcery, you Surveil 2, gain 2, then it has Flashback of 4, and if you cast it from your graveyard, you exile it and get the backside Transform with a Finality counter on it. The backside Summer Esper Modded, a 4 mana Saga Elemental. First lore counter, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a permanent, it goes to your hand. Next lore counter, 2 green mana, so you get a little bit of ramping. And then the big payoff, the last lore counter, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain trample until end of turn. So this card, I'm really not sure how good this is. The front side, it is important to point out, it just surveils 2 and gains 2. It doesn't immediately replace itself. I know people will argue, and it's probably true, that Surveil 2 is roughly the equivalent of drawing a card, but we have a lot of cards in Standard, like Cash Grabs and Say Its Names and the new Satyr Wayfinder, that are 2 mana, they mill some cards, and they immediately replace themselves. So I kind of feel like this is not the best graveyard filler. So if you're playing this, it's really going to be for the backside, which the backside, it is good, but it requires some setup to really be good. So the front side, the closest comparison, it's basically a one-shot Corroding Dragonstorm, except you don't get to drain your opponent, you just gain the life, which we haven't really seen Corroding Dragonstorm take off in Standard. It's been on the fringes, but that's mostly because it's bounceable in some of the Esper Pixie decks and whatnot. So I don't think the front side of this card is actually good enough to see play. The backside is legitimately good if you can hit all the modes. So the first mode, draw a card. You don't need a bunch of permanents in your deck, but if you're going to play this, you're probably going to play a bunch of permanents to try to power it up anyway. So draw a card, 2 extra green mana, which can ramp you into something big, and then the overrun mode, if you can build a board, actually can just be game ending on the spot. So I think the Saga creature is actually pretty good, but is it good if you have to spend 4 mana on it? Like if you have to spend 2 mana for the underpowered front side, and then 4 mana to flash it back to get the backside, this seems like a lot of hoops to jump through for a card that's kind of like okay okay, but not super busted. So I think maybe the most exciting way to play with this card is actually just try to avoid the front side altogether. Just get it in the graveyard. Maybe you're a self-mill deck. Maybe you're a Fear of Missing Out deck. Maybe you got Picklock Prankster. If you can just mill this into the graveyard, then you don't have to spend 2 mana for Surveil 2 and gain 2 life, which is kind of nice, and then you can just do the flashback mode whenever it's going to be most beneficial after you get things set up. The first thing I thought of is this is probably going to be good in some sort of like Urborg Lurgoyf, Cruel Somnophage deck. I know every spoiler season for the past 3 years, I think I've talked about maybe this is the time that we finally get this graveyard deck in Standard. Every time it does not work out, and that'll probably happen again this time, but Esper Origins does seem really good there, right? The only downside is it's not a creature itself to grow your Lurgoyfs and your Somnophages, but it fills a graveyard. You're going to have a lot of creatures in the deck, so you should be able to draw a card with the first lore counter on the backside. The mana's fine, and then the real payoff is if you can give your Urborg Lurgoyfs, your Cruel Somnophages, trample for a turn, they're probably just going to win you the game. These are creatures that with an open graveyard get absolutely massive. The only problem is they tend to just get chump blocked a million times because they don't have any evasion, but Summon Esper Maudin actually kind of gets around that issue. So maybe we'll be able to see one last chance for Urborg Lurgoyf to shine before rotation. Probably the best way to play this card, though, is just try to cheat on the flashback cost. If you read the front side carefully, all it cares about is being cast from your graveyard. You don't have to cast it for its flashback cost, which means in Standard you can like Songcrafter Mage and flash it back at a much cheaper price thanks to Harmonize. And if you're getting the backside of this for like 1 mana instead of 4 mana, then that's actually a legit powerful card, right? That's a lot of value. In older formats, seen with Snapcaster Mage, you can flash it back for 2 mana rather than paying 4 mana. So if you can get Summer Esper Maudin at a discount, that's where the card becomes exciting. My biggest issue with this card in Standard is just that I think we have other better options. Like if you think about Standard right now and you're interested in filling your graveyard, which is the kind of deck that would want this card, we got Town Greeter, our new Satyr Wayfinder, we got Dredger's Insight, we got Cash Grab, we got Say Its Name. All of these cards not only dig deeper and put more cards into your graveyard than Esper Origins, but they also replace themselves right away. So it's really hard for me to see a world where I want to play Esper Origins just to like Surveil 2 and gain 2 life, when I could Cash Grab and mill 4 and get a card back to my hand. Or Dredger's Insight, mill some cards, get a card back to my hand, maybe gain some life along the way. So I feel like there's just other better options in most decks, which might keep Esper Origins from seeing plays. So Esper Origins, let me know what you think about this card. I feel like the backside is relatively powerful. The front side, though, I don't know if it's worth playing to get to the backside. And if you got to pay 4 mana for flashback for the backside, then it's even more kind of questionable. So, I don't know. I kind of expect this one not to see much play, but let me know what you think about it in the comments. On the other hand, we got our White Adventureland, and this one is really good. Ishgard the Holy Sea. So, Ishgard, it makes white mana, enters tapped. Its adventure side, a 5-mana sorcery, says return up to 2 target artifact and or enchantment cards from your graveyard to your hand. So I think this is one of the better MDFCs that we've seen in a long time. I know that it's not technically an MDFC, but it plays a lot like MDFC. I think the draw 2, not only drawing 2, but drawing your 2 best artifacts or enchantments from your graveyard is going to make this a card that can see play in a lot of different decks. In Standard, back in Pioneer probably, and definitely in a ton of Commander decks. So we don't really have another card in Magic that just straight up returns 2 artifacts and enchantments from your graveyard to your hand. The closest I could find was Mind Excavation, which isn't a great comparison because you gotta tap 2 creatures if you want to get back 2 things. I think that Ishgard, 5 mana is like kind of a lot, but when you consider it comes attached to a land, the opportunity cost of playing this card is just so low that you're willing to pay a little bit more to get those cards back to your hand than you would if it was just a normal card that wasn't attached to a land. So if you think about where this card can show up, most obvious home in Standard, probably the blue-white artifact decks. This Simulacrum Synthesizer, Repurposing Bay decks, it seems perfect for those shells. Not only can you use it to get back cards that you sacked to Repurposing Bay, but it's kind of even better than that because Simulacrum Synthesizer is so busted that your opponents know they have to kill this card. Like, they have to get it off the battlefield or the big constructs are going to take over the game. So this is a way that you can get back your Simulacrum Synthesizers that your opponent blows up. So I think that the blue-white artifact deck definitely wants Ishgard. Another sneaky home is some of the like Orzhov or Abzan self-bounce decks. Those decks got tons of Hopeless Nightmares, nowhere to runs, temporary lockdowns, and in the late game just being able to get back Hopeless Nightmares that got killed or that your opponent sacked to finish off the game with a little more damage. That's probably good enough on its own. It's just another super grindy card. And that's exactly what those decks want to do. They just want to grind and grind and grind. And Ishgard's another super grindy card to enter the mix. Once you get back to Pioneer, seems really good in the Caretaker's Talent decks. We've kind of seen these decks rise since United Battlefront was printed, to give them like their collected company, to get their wedding announcements and Caretaker's Talents. Another really grindy deck that can kind of get away, I think, with playing a tap land. And then in the late game, this just gets back your Caretaker's Talent, gets back your wedding announcement. Modern is a little bit more questionable. Like, it would fit in something like Modern Affinity, but I think in Modern, 5 mana just might be a little bit too much for it to really see play, but still being able to get back your Thought Monitor or Mirror Enforcers or whatever, pretty reasonable. The other place this could see play is in decks that just really need one specific artifact or enchantment. Like if you're playing a Goblin Charbelcher deck, that's the only artifact that really matters, but that artifact matters so much that maybe it's worth playing an Ishgard. In case your opponent counters your Belcher or whatever, you can just pitch your Ishgard, use it to get back the Goblin Charbelcher, play it as a land the next turn anyway. So that's another possibility in like combo decks built around one artifact or an enchantment. In Commander, this card is just a legit all-star. Like in Commander, artifact decks and enchantment decks are two of the most popular themes in the entire format, and white is the most popular color, I believe, for each of those themes. So I think if you're playing any sort of enchantment deck or artifact deck, this is good enough to make it in your Commander deck. Like, it's just really, really valuable. It's only taking up a land slot. Sure, it comes into play tap, but you can afford a couple of tap lands, and the ability to get back your two best artifacts or enchantments in the late game is just really, really good. So I think Ishgard, probably the strongest of the adventure lands we've seen so far. I think the blue mill one's really good, but it's pretty narrow. You gotta be a mill deck. I think the green one is like generically fine. It just makes a big creature. But Ishgard, I think this might be one of the most powerful adventure lands we've seen so far, and I expect that we will see this one in a lot of decks in Standard, all the way back to Pioneer, and definitely a ton in Commander. We also got an interesting new blue legend in Matoya Archon Elder, so a 3-mana 1/4 legendary human warlock, and it's got a super simple line of text. Whenever you scry or surveil, draw a card once you're done scrying or surveilling. So Matoya, we've never really seen a card that does exactly what this does before. The closest I can think of is Elegith. Elegith, the Sphinx legend that when you scry, you get to draw equal to the number of times you scryed. Matoya is a little bit different. It's much cheaper for one thing. But the big difference is when you scry or surveil, you only draw one card. Whether you scry 1, scry 3, scry 100, it's still just going to be one card for each time you do it. Elegith really wants you to like scry a big number of times at once, and then you draw a big number of cards. Matoya really wants repeated small numbers of surveilling and scrying, which is really powerful because scrying and surveilling is often priced super cheaply. Imagine just in Standard, we got surveil lands, we got scry lands, you play Matoya, every time you play one of these, you just get to draw a card for free, which is already kind of ridiculous. But then think of like Opt or Suravision or Curate, these cantrips that are like scry and then draw a card. Opt, I know, this is the old version. It actually says surveil one and then draw a card now. But all these cards become supercharged with Matoya. Imagine spending 1 mana for an Opt and drawing 2 cards. 1 mana for a Suravision and drawing 2 cards. Really, really busted. And then you get to like the engine pieces, the stuff that really lets you pop off with Matoya. Like Merit Lage's Slumber, whenever a snow permanent enters, you get to scry 1. If you got Matoya, instead of scrying 1, well, you still get to scry 1, but you're going to draw a card every time you play a snow permanent. Or like Artificer's Assistant becomes an absolutely insane card advantage engine. When you cast a historic spell, scry 1, that's normally not that exciting, right? A little bit of card selection, but if you got Matoya out, every historic spell, artifact, legend, or saga that you cast, you're gonna get to draw a card too. Retreat to Koraham has landfall, scry 1, Doom Whisper, pay 2 life, surveil 2. If you add Matoya to the mix, it's pay 2 life, surveil 2, and then draw a card. You're gonna draw most of your deck. So there's just so many ways you can build around this to turn it into an absolutely busted card advantage engine. Whether or not this will actually be a thing in competitive play, that's another question, but this is a card that has me really hyped to build like a combo deck around it, because I feel like with the right pieces, this is certainly the kind of engine that can run an entire deck. Once you get back to Commander, you get some really spicy homes. So if you have a commander that is built around scrying and surveilling, and you're in blue, I think you probably play Matoya. So you can build Matoya as your commander. Honestly, it seems a little bit boring to me. Like, yeah, you're going to draw a ton of cards. It can maybe be a combo commander, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I'm actually kind of most hyped to just throw this in the 99 with other commanders that care about surveilling or scrying. Like Eloise, for example. Whenever you sack a token, you surveil one. Eloise is also really good at making tokens thanks to its investigate mode. If you throw Matoya to the mix, you're just going to draw most of your deck with Eloise. Or like Hilda, when you tap something, you can scry 2 and draw a card. Throw some card advantage to the mix. There's a few legends from the Lord of the Rings set that care about scrying. Elminster cares about scrying. Kesla cares about scrying. So in any of these decks, I think Matoya is going to be one of the first cards you add to the 99 because it is just going to supercharge all the synergies of your deck. If you're playing one of these commanders, you're already going to be doing a lot of scrying or a lot of surveilling, and you just throw this in and turn all that scrying and surveilling into card draw and have a really good time. As far as comboing with this card, so I think if you build this as your commander, there is one way I've seen to go infinite with it involving Curator of Mysteries. So Curator of Mysteries says whenever you cycle or discard a card, you get to scry one. So if you can get Curator of Mysteries down alongside Matoya, and then some sort of free repeatable discard outlet, so maybe Mind Over Matter, you can discard a card to tap or untap something, Ghostly Pill for even, you can discard a card to make it unblockable. So if you have Curator of Mysteries, Matoya in one of these pieces, you essentially just get to loot through your entire deck. You discard a card to trigger the Curator, which will let you scry, which will turn into draw with Matoya, and then you can discard the new card and do it again. So by itself, it just like fills your graveyard and lets you draw your entire deck. But if you throw something into the mix that triggers based off of card draw, like a Sphinx's tutelage, Teferi's tutelage, or whatever, then you just mill out the entire table, win the game on the spot. So I think if you're building Matoya as your commander, that's probably what I'd be looking for, is like a bunch of scry and surveil synergies, and then probably a combo finish to close out the game. So Matoya, it's only 3 mana. This card, I don't know if it's going to see standard play. It doesn't really look like a standard card to me, but in those scry decks in Commander, it seems like a ridiculous engine piece. It's going to be one of the best cards in your deck. We also got a card that I can't shake the feeling might be one of the best constructed cards from the set in Astrologian's Planisphere. So Astrologian's Planisphere, a 2-mana equipment. It is job select, so it comes along with the 1/1 hero token. Then it says, equip creature is a wizard in addition to its other types, and it has, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and whenever you draw your 3rd card for each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and it equips for 2 mana. So this card to me seems absolutely wild. If you think about what this is, it's essentially a sprite dragon. You don't get flying, unfortunately, but you get the upside that it's an equipment. So you start off with the sprite dragon, but then if your hero dies, or if you just want to move it onto a flyer or something, for just 2 mana you can move it onto something else and turn that into a sprite dragon. And you even get the extra upside that if you draw your 3rd card, you get an extra trigger. But really, it's just kind of a supercharged prowess card where you play this, you have a 2-drop that every non-creature spell you cast is going to grow, and eventually this thing's going to be like a 5/5 on turn 2 or something. And part of the reason to be excited for this card is we already know these synergies can work because they're the same exact kind of cards that you would play in the Cori-Steel Cutter deck, currently the best deck in Standard. So this gives you a second equipment that I imagine could be one of the engine pieces of this deck. I will say, I don't think it's as good as Cori-Steel Cutter. The power of Cori-Steel Cutter is you essentially just keep making that hero over and over and over again. Astrologian's Planisphere, only going to make the 1 hero, so it's not going to be as good as Cori-Steel Cutter, but as a backup Cori-Steel Cutter, the fact that the counters stick around, they're permanent, you're not just getting prowess to buff your creature for the turn, you're growing it permanently, seems really easy to just throw it in some sort of deck with Ops and Sleight of Hands and Burst Lightnings, and have this be kind of your backup Cori-Steel Cutter, one of the big threats in your deck. It also just seems good in any sort of prowess deck. It works well with Monastery Swiftspear, Storm Chaser's Talents, so the pieces for this already exist in Standard. Once you get back to older formats, maybe you can get a little value out of turning the equipped creature into a wizard. There's not a ton of synergies for this, but like Wizard's Lightning gets a discount if you have a wizard. Ataliz pumps your wizards whenever you cast a spell. So in that context, maybe turning the creature into a wizard does have some upside, but really, I don't think the wizard text is that important. I think this card is just an insane card on its own. I don't want to go too far and say this is going to see playing like Legacy or whatever, but there are even more synergies that draw your 3rd card for a turn. In Standard, that's kind of just flavor. flavor text. Like, yeah, once in a while it might come up, but that's not really going to be the focal piece of Astrologian's Planisphere. But once you get to older formats, or like Timeless on Magic Arena, you got cards like Brainstorm that are just going to draw you 3 cards at once. Treasure Cruise, another way you can draw 3 cards at once. Think about in a format like Timeless or in Legacy, you cast a Brainstorm, you're going to double trigger Astrologian's Plane. You're going to get a trigger for casting a non-creature spell, and you're going to get one for drawing your 3rd card of the turn. That's just going to make that hero token really big, really fast. So I think Astrologian's Blade, to me, this feels like one of the best constructed cards that we've seen from the set so far. We already know Prowess decks are good right now, and this just seems to fit so perfectly into those shells that I would not be surprised to see this one seeing play at least back to Pioneer, maybe even further back than that, and as a look of maybe a standard stable. So Astrologian's Planisphere, don't sleep on this one. Pretty sure this is the best job select card we've seen so far, and one of the best constructed cards that we've seen from the entire set. As far as lower rarity cards, we got a few interesting ones today, starting with Zach Fair. So Zach Fair, a 1-mana 0/1 legendary human soldier. My god, everything is a friggin' legend in this set. It enters with a +1/+1 counter, so it's actually a 1/2, and then it says, you can pay 1 and sacrifice it. Target creature you control gets indestructible and end of turn. Put Zach Fair's counters on that creature, and attach an equipment that was attached to Zach Fair to that creature. So we've seen cards like this in the past. Dauntless Bodyguard, Selfish Savior, these 1-drops that can sacrifice themselves to save something, actually be pretty good. Zach Fair, it does have an issue, which you gotta leave up a mana to activate it, which might be a deal breaker. On the other hand, the fact that you get to move the counters and maybe an equipment over makes me think that in the right deck, this card could actually be pretty good. In some sort of equipment deck or +1/+1 counter deck, it's like a midway to protect your team, but also relatively powerful thanks to the counter shenanigans and the equipment shenanigans. So I don't think this card's a staple or anything, but it's good enough and cheap enough that it's worth keeping in mind because it could show up in a deck somewhere. We also got a weird new removally mana rock in white Aratrice. So it's a 4-mana artifact. When it enters, you exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield, and it taps to make a white mana. So this card is intriguing to me. So it's essentially like an Oblivion ring mixed with a marble diamond. Kind of expensive at 4 mana. Also reminds me a bit of Buried in the Garden, where Buried in the Guardian exiles something, makes an extra mana as long as it sticks around. The question is this card actually good enough? And I think for one reason the answer might be yes. So in Standard, I wouldn't play this in most decks, and one of the biggest risks of this card is if you exile something good of your opponents, you kind of encourage them to blow up your mana rock, which is kind of awkward in Commander. But in Standard, I could see this being worth it in the Ugin decks. We've seen some like mono-white Ugin decks, which are just all about ramping into Ugin, and this seems like a really interesting option there. You play it, it helps you ramp into Ugin. Yes, the removal is probably going to be temporary because your opponent can blow it up, but still, if you can buy yourself a turn or two to get to the Ugin, hopefully the Ugin just takes over the game. So in the mono-white Ugin decks, I think this would be worth considering in Standard. In Commander, 4 mana is kind of a lot, and like I said before, I kind of dislike that if you exile your opponent's best thing with this, it's incentivizing them to blow up your mana rock. So I think as a mana rock, it is a little bit sketchy, but still interesting enough to keep in mind for Commander too. We also got a new affinity threat in Valkyrie Aerial Unit. So a 7 mana 5/4 flyer. When it enters, you surveil 2, an affinity for artifacts. So you can get it down to 2 mana if you have 5 artifacts out. And I think this is notable for 2 reasons. So the big one is, could work well alongside Memory Guardian in the Simulacrum Synthesizer decks. Now we'll have 2 big affinity flyers in the format, so maybe we see some sort of like affinity artifact deck take over. It's also pretty cute with Repurposing Bay. This is kind of like Demonic Junker, as an affinity card that you can get on the battlefield really cheaply, and then Repurposing Bay up into an 8-drop. Unfortunately, the 8-drops we have that are artifacts in Standard are not super great at the moment. It's really Graz and Cityscape leveler, but still, this is another way you can really jump the curve quickly with Repurposing Bay. So Valkyrie Aerial Unit, I don't expect it to be good enough for like Affinity and Modern or whatever, but for Standard Affinity with Repurposing Bay, could be a pretty good option. We also got a sweet new artifact reanimation spell in Phoenix Down. So 1 mana artifact, you can pay 2, and tap it, and exile this artifact to either exile a skeleton, spirit, or zombie, not super relevant, or reanimate a creature with mana value 4 or less from your graveyard. It enters tap. So Phoenix Down, we've seen Helping Hands be really good in Standard, getting back Oculi and so forth, and I think that Phoenix Down probably worse in the Oculus decks in specific, but being able to reanimate anything up to 4 mana value is actually pretty powerful. If you think about this all together, it's 3 mana to reanimate something that's 4+, which is gaining you some mana along the way, and getting up to 4 drops does open up some sweet synergies. I think the best home for this card probably going to be with Bright Glass Gearhulk. So we've already seen some Bright Glass Gearhulk decks just having this big toolbox of 1 mana things to tutor up. Phoenix Down seems perfect there. You can use Bright Glass Gearhulk to get the Phoenix Down. The Phoenix Down can then reanimate the Bright House Gearhulk. Maybe you get a Dusk Rose Reliquary or something, you sack the Bright Glass, get some removal out of it, then reanimate the Bright Glass, do it again. It really makes a strong value loop there. So I think with Bright Glass Gearhulk in specific, this card seems really good, and I could see it showing up in some other decks too as a reanimation spell. We also got Zidane Cheerful Thief, a 5 mana 3/3 legendary human mutant scout. When it enters, you gain control of target creature an opponent controls until end of turn. You untap it, it gets lifelink and haste until end of turn. And whenever an opponent gains control of a permanent you control, like when you give back the thing that you steal, you make a treasure token. So this card, worth mentioning, just because it's basically fixed Jealous Conscripts. Zealous Conscripts actually saw quite a bit of play back in its day, but it got to hit anything. Zidane only hits creatures. And part of the power of Zealous Conscripts is you could go infinite with Kiki Jiki, because you could untap your own Kiki, keep copying the Zealous Conscripts, make an infinite board of Zealous Conscripts. Zidane is worded in a way where that doesn't work, because it can only gain control of a creature an opponent controls. There's no combo potential, so that's the main reason I wanted to shout this card out. It does seem like a fun uncommon commander, though. Of course, also some draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGPreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Final Fantasy spoilers for today. And this set, it just keeps getting better. I really love this set. And this is coming from someone who's not a Final Fantasy player, but just as a Magic player. There's so many cool build-arounds that we've seen from this set already. But let me know what you're thinking. How you feeling about the set? What are you thinking about today's cards? Let me know in the comments. And I'll be back tomorrow with even more Final Fantasy spoilers. Oh yeah, and by the way, it was Commander Precon Day. So make sure to check out Tomer's video over on the Commander channel, going through all the cards from the new Commander Precon, which is going to be out shortly, so keep it out for that too. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? We can find yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the video where we talked about how cheating is kind of getting out of hand in Magic.